team of Truthseekers is on a mission. Scientists, historians, archaeologists, all on the trail of history's enigmas. Searching for the truth behind the greatest mysteries known to humanity. It is an area covering over 500,000 square miles. A place where numerous ships and dozens of planes have gone missing without a trace. It is the Bermuda Triangle. Is it caused by a natural phenomena? Is it a psychic doorway or a portal to another dimension? Our four Truthseekers combine decades of experience in different fields, but they all have one goal: to apply their knowledge and reveal the truth.
There are mysteries, and then there are mysteries.
I have always loved uncovering the secrets of the past.
We need to go back and unpick the untruths from the truth.
Age-old problems that we've been asking ourselves over 100 years, really, can now be solved.
They'll follow the clues left behind, unravel the secrets of the past, separate fact from fiction, and together they'll uncover the truth behind the greatest mysteries ever.
What's fascinating about the Bermuda Triangle is that with every age of technology, from ships to planes, we've remained fixed that this is one point in the globe where you are at danger and at risk.
The Bermuda Triangle appeals to us on some kind of deep psychological level. It creates a place where our fears live.
All kinds of extraordinary theories have attempted to explain these vanishings, from magnetic force fields to wormholes to the lost city of Atlantis. It's the stuff of legend, but when exactly did this legend begin? And are supernatural forces really to blame, or are perfectly reasonable explanations hiding in plain sight?
The Bermuda Triangle today brings me back to being young and very fearful. I really thought it must be real as a child.
The 20th century has seen the Bermuda Triangle lodged in our psyche. It's an unknown entity in a known world, a place where the laws of nature no longer apply, a place that we've been told never to venture.
It tells us that between Miami, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda, there is an area where things are disappearing.
Each report brings a new story, a new horror, and a new mystery.
There's a flurry of newspaper articles about incidents within what we come to call the Bermuda Triangle.
Boats here 1 minute, gone the next. Planes lost in fog. Warships sinking with no wreck and no survivors. The most recent incident happened only a few years ago. A 29-foot Mako Cuddy cabin boat carrying 20 passengers set sail from Bimini in the Bahamas to Lake Worth Beach, Florida. But the vessel never makes it to its destination. The U.S. Coast Guard searches 17,000 square miles for 84 hours until the mission is finally called off.
It was a perfectly clear day. No SOS signal sent. But apparently, the boat just disappeared.
The boat seems to have vanished into thin air, stoking the imaginations of many who believed the area is a hotbed of strange anomalies. But the Mako Cuddy's puzzling disappearance is only one among many vanishing acts.
Tales of mysterious happenings in the Bermuda Triangle go back centuries. In fact, the first recorded is by Christopher Columbus when he sailed the Atlantic in 1492.
In his ship's log, Columbus wrote about several unusual accounts.
Columbus described a great flaming fire that fell into the sea. He wrote of a light, like a wax candle, that rose and lifted up in the sky. The third thing he noticed was very strange compass readings. They were off by 11¼ degrees and didn't line up with the North Star. This was incredibly distressing to Columbus and his crew.
Many have pointed to these examples as early evidence of the supernatural. But do these incidents have a more grounded explanation?
The day Columbus noted the appearance of this flame of fire was September 15th. And we know now that there were meteor showers in the region at that time. Now, of course, Columbus wouldn't have recognized it as such, but it would have indeed created the look of a tail of fire in the sky.
The explanation for the light rising like a candle was even more straightforward.
As for the light that behaved like a bobbing candle, what's often left out is that just a few hours later, Columbus reached the shore. And so scholars today think it's likely he simply saw the fires of the Taino people of San Salvador.
The discrepancies with the compasses are more complicated, but not inexplicable. Sailors often used Polaris, the North Star, to navigate across the seas. If they could see the star, they knew which direction they were headed, but if it was cloudy, they turned to their compasses.
When they found their compass didn't align with the North Star, it confused and upset them. But what they didn't know is that sometimes magnetic north can change, and the compass will align with that instead.
It wouldn't be until the 1830s when British scientists would initiate the Magnetic Crusade, an opportunity to measure magnetic deviation. The survey was to be used to aid ships, but also designed to better understand why Earth's magnetic field changes over time. True north is the northernmost point of the Earth's rotational axis and is where the lines of longitude converge. This is a fixed point on the Earth's surface which never moves. Magnetic north, however, is generated from the magnetic field the Earth itself creates. This point isn't fixed, is located up to 500 kilometers away from true north, and is moving all the time. The difference between these locations causes a phenomena called magnetic declination and can create anomalies which need to be accounted for to gain accurate compass readings.
We're talking about a thoroughly pre-modern understanding of science and how the world works. We understand things about the movements of the heavenly bodies and the Earth's magnetism that Columbus simply could not know. They believed in the Aristotelian theory that the Earth was the center of the universe. Everything in the heavens was considered perfect and immovable, and the idea of a meteor would have been incomprehensible to them.
For pre-modern people, the ocean itself was a frightening and foreboding place, holding myths and legends of monsters since antiquity.
Monsters of the deep were very real to these people. Giant squids that would devour sailors, a serpent that would wrap itself around a ship, or a siren waiting to lure mariners to their death.
Decorated maps from the Middle Ages depict some of these creatures. While they appear whimsical, they were taken from what cartographers viewed as scientific journals. Sea monsters like Leviathan, portrayed as a whale demon with several heads, was considered to have an unquenchable desire to consume all of God's creations. Sea serpents were notorious for snatching up sailors, and seductive mermaids lured them to their demise.
The classic sea monsters. They were all a cautionary tale for people to be careful out there. You know, the Leviathan, the Kraken, the sea dragon, the mermaids. They were out there waiting. The sea and its monsters were externalizations of humans' deepest fears. The unseen, the unknown, and death itself.
These mythical creatures and stories even endured into the 1800s, when a U.S. Hydrographic Office, undertaking a routine survey, discovered and recorded ghost ships in the region of the Bermuda Triangle.
1,600 ships just floating aimlessly without a sign of any crew aboard. That would have been one scary report to read.
And this wasn't uncommon for the area around the Bermuda Triangle. Drifting derelicts, as they are known, were being recorded at a rate of over 1,000 a year up until the end of the 19th century. Most of these would break up within a month, but some stalked the North Atlantic waters for up to 3 years. While sea monsters make for a colorful explanation and ghost ships were certainly common, it's not always the case that sinister events are at play. A more likely cause might have been the weather.
One explanation could be the doldrums, when the northern hemisphere's trade winds move southwest and collide with the southern hemisphere's northwest trade winds.
The doldrums is a popular nautical term referring to the belt around the Earth near the equator with slow-moving warm air currents. This, combined with trade winds passing in opposite directions, has the effect of creating still, windless waters. These are particularly prevalent in the North Atlantic, where sailing ships sometimes get stuck and can drift aimlessly for weeks.
If they don't have enough supplies on board, sailors might have resorted to drinking seawater, which causes dehydration and can lead to confusion and madness and hallucinations, which would cause some to jump right overboard and abandon ship.
This could explain the numbers of drifting derelicts, sailboats, abandoned so thirsty sailors could row for land.
But this doesn't explain every account, and we have to consider some alternative explanations, including piracy.
Bermuda and its surrounding waters have long been a hotbed for piracy and smuggling, from the golden age of piracy in the 17th and 18th centuries, right through to the narco-trafficking trade of the late 20th century and beyond. But while that may have contributed to the notoriety of these seas, they don't account for wholesale disappearances. Columbus and his men undoubtedly experienced things that were strange, frightening, and very real. But unlike the Mako Cuddy and the myriad ghost ships, they didn't disappear into oblivion. So when exactly did this mystifying stretch of ocean begin swallowing ships and planes whole? And what was to blame? It's been called the Devil's Triangle, limbo of the lost, the Hoodoo Sea, but to most, it's simply the Bermuda Triangle, a fearsome and mythical span of the Atlantic Ocean bounded by Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, where countless ships and planes have gone missing. Are extraordinary forces behind these disappearances? Or could the answers be in plain sight? In London, archaeologist and data scientist Mark Altweel examines the evidence.
Now, given that this place doesn't necessarily have more disappearances than other regions, there are some notable exceptions that have really caught the public's imagination. There have been some notable planes and boats that have disappeared. One of this was the USS Cyclops.
The Cyclops was one of the biggest and fastest ships in the U.S. Navy. It was steel-hulled and immense, sitting at nearly 550 feet long and 65 feet wide. It was also home to 309 crew members.
The USS Cyclops was carrying a large load of manganese coming from Brazil, going to Barbados, and then eventually was to make its way into Baltimore. Now, on March 18th, 1919, the ship disappears. It sends its last message saying that the weather is fair, all is well. But then all of a sudden, the boat's gone.
The U.S. Navy's official statement said that the disappearance of the ship had been one of the most baffling mysteries in its history. All attempts to locate it had proved unsuccessful.
Now, usually when a large ship sinks, or even a small ship sinks, you would expect to find some debris or some remnants of the ship itself. In the case of the USS Cyclops, not a single thing has been found. This was not a small ship. This was actually perhaps the largest, or among the largest ships that the U.S. Navy had at this time.
In the decades after, a flurry of theories abound, from the outrageous that the ship was eaten by a sea creature or carried off by aliens, to the more plausible that it succumbed to mutiny, was sunk by German torpedoes, or encountered a freak storm.
Now, there have been some hypotheses as to what happened to the USS Cyclops. One is that perhaps a mutiny on board, that the crew may have revolted for some reason.
Perhaps even more intriguing, the captain of the ship, Johann Wickman, was a German immigrant to the U.S. and was subject to reports of an overbearing and violent character. The consul for Bermuda at the time sent a telegram to the U.S. Secretary of State with suspicions that he may have commandeered the ship, dispatched the crew on board, and placed it in service to the German state.
A second possibility is that the U.S. began to fight Germany This is beginning of World War I in terms of the American involvement in World War I. Possibly this ship was actually sunk in a hostile engagement. However, during any sinking in a U-boat incident, you'd expect some debris to be found or some records. The Germans were very adept at keeping records where their submarines were, and no wartime records indicates any U-boats were in action against U.S. vessels in this area.
Further analysis of the records has shown there are no indications this ship was ever in civil or military service for Germany.
My expectation is that eventually you'll find a huge vessel like that somewhere on the Earth, but we've not made this discovery for now more than 100 years. Now, one possibility is the ship's cargo specifically. The vessel was repurposed to carry coal. However, in this case, it was actually carrying manganese, which is a much denser material. So one possibility is that the manganese may have somehow breached the hull. Another possibility is perhaps the manganese ignited, leading to a catastrophic explosion.
But as with lots of events associated with the Bermuda Triangle, people tend to look for the fanciful first when the truth can be found far closer to home.
Now, to try to find reasons as to what may have happened to the USS Cyclops, we could look at the logs of the ship. Prior to the vessel going through Barbados, there's an indication in the logs that there's a cracked cylinder on board. And in fact, that's why the vessel was sailing towards Baltimore.
So maybe it was classic mechanical or structural failure. Others have suggested bad weather may have blindsided the Cyclops. Called extreme storm waves by scientists, a rogue wave is 2 to 3 times taller than the average wave. They are formed when storms coincide from several directions. The Bermuda Triangle is prone to these weather conditions blowing in from Mexico, the equator, and farther east in the Atlantic.
The scientist Tim Jensen has purported another idea, which is that perhaps rogue waves, these sort of large waves that are formed in the oceans, may have potentially overtaken the vessel, that it may have led to the structural and catastrophic failures experienced on the vessel.
As part of an investigation into the Bermuda Triangle, British researchers used lab and computer models to simulate the effects of rogue waves more than 100 feet tall on ships. They found that long vessels could easily get caught between 2 large wave peaks. With nothing supporting them from below, the ships would snap in half.
It is possible that rogue waves can occur. This vessel could have been capsized by these rogue waves. However, we have to keep in mind that finding evidence for the sinking of this vessel is going to be difficult. The vessel sank in the Puerto Rico trenches, which are actually among the deepest trenches in the Atlantic Ocean. So the likelihood of finding evidence as to what caused this vessel to sink is very minimal.
Over 100 years later, the fate of the ship is still unknown, and the case remains one of the most perplexing mysteries in naval history.
Now, the USS Cyclops, this was the largest naval disaster in the history of the US Navy. There's also another major incident, this time affecting aviation history in the Bermuda Triangle, and that includes this incident of Flight 19.
Flight 19 brought the mystery of the Bermuda Triangle from the seas to the air and brought disaster and death to all those on board.
Flight 19 was a group of training aircraft, 5 aircraft that went into the Bermuda Triangle and that disappeared in one single day. On top of that, the search plane that was sent to look for Flight 19 also disappeared. So you had 6 total aircraft disappearing in one single day.
On December 5th, 1945, 5 Avenger torpedo bombers dubbed Flight 19 left Fort Lauderdale, Florida, on a routine navigational exercise.
Flight 19 was on a routine training mission in 1945. They were going to an area called the Hens and Chicken Shoals. Then they were to turn and go towards the Grand Bahamas and then eventually make their way back to their airbase.
The planes dropped their practice bombs without incident, but shortly after they turned north for the second leg of their journey, the lead pilot, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, became disoriented.
Now, as Flight 19 is heading towards their second leg of their journey, Charles Taylor, who was the leader of this training mission, he's a seasoned veteran, flew multiple combat missions, really knew stuff. But he begins to report that he's disoriented, he's lost. His compass was not working, that the directions it was showing were not true. He basically didn't believe his instruments.
Radio communications showed that Taylor sounded anxious and indicated he was trying to find Fort Lauderdale.
Charles Taylor was disoriented. His group was lost at this point. So he begins to take land sighting. He tries to fixate on a point on land to see where he was. He becomes convinced that he's actually over the Florida Keys, an area that was hundreds of miles away from the Bahamas, where he was supposed to be.
Taylor made a dire decision to steer Flight 19 northeast, a course that took them farther out to sea.
Charles Taylor at this point was convinced that he was over the Florida Keys, so to get back towards the Bahamas, he needs to fly effectively northeast. So he begins to go that direction and continues onwards. Now, in this radio transmission, there's a voice that says we should turn west. There's disagreement with Charles Taylor's decision. Unfortunately, since Charles Taylor is the senior commander in this mission, they take the advice to go northeast.
2 hours later, radio communications turned to static.
After the disappearance of Flight 19, the U.S. military dispatches 2 search planes, 2 flying boats, these PB Mariners at the time. So these 2 planes go searching for Flight 19. However, only one of them comes back. One of the flying boats effectively disappears as well.
The one that returned from its flight to the last known location of Flight 19 reported no sightings, no debris, no smoke, no plane. The Navy dispatched more than 300 boats and aircraft to look for Flight 19 and the missing mariner. They spent 5 days combing more than 300,000 square miles and came up empty-handed. The planes and the mariner were lost to what the Navy Board of Investigation attributed to causes or reasons unknown.
This sort of mysterious aspects of the Bermuda Triangle, that's ability to just take things and make them disappear from the Earth, may have been the reasons as to why Flight 19 and the PB Mariner disappeared. However, if we begin to search, we might find more practical reasons, perhaps more mundane reasons as to why these aircraft disappeared.
Mark Altaweel has reviewed the case file, looked behind the data to uncover the truth of events on that fateful day, and yet again, it could be down to the magnetic influence of the Earth.
Now, some of the reasons as to why perhaps Flight 19 became lost could include the fact that Charles Taylor, the commanding officer, was actually normally stationed in Fort Lauderdale in Florida, and then he was transferred to this region. Perhaps he mistook some of the islands for islands that he was more typically aware of or knew about.
Before modern navigation systems, pilots often relied on sight to navigate, and even today, the Federal Aviation Administration estimates that each year in the USA, 10 planes land at the wrong airport due to mistaken land sightings.
Additionally, it was reported that a meteorological front had moved in. These conditions may have created a kind of situation where there could have been confusion. High clouds would have formed, and these may have confused the situation to Charles Taylor. He would have had less ability, perhaps, to navigate through this situation through the high cloud coverage.
Although evidence confirms that a storm was moving in, that same evidence does not appear to account for the missing mariner.
In terms of the incident with the PB Mariner, there may be an even more basic explanation as to why that aircraft disappeared. We know there was a boat that was passing nearby, and it did report an explosion in the sky. We know the PB Mariners were actually structurally deficient. There were problems with that aircraft. They were even nicknamed flying gas tanks because of structural failures that led to sometimes explosions to occur on the aircraft. So this could be an explanation as to why that particular aircraft disappeared.
Because there is no conclusive evidence of the plane's disappearances, the events of that December day have become fodder for paranormal theories.
True north and magnetic north align differently in the Bermuda Triangle. That may actually contribute to the story and the mythology of the Bermuda Triangle, that perhaps there is something paranormal in the Bermuda Triangle that leads to vessels and aircraft to disappear.
Although for some, science can get in the way, the Bermuda Triangle is a story consistently reinforced by a willing press, ready to break the next big news story. Articles abound on the Bermuda Triangle and its seemingly never-ending list of victims. It doesn't take a big leap to assign greater significance to these seemingly regular events.
Now, all these stories, these reports can maybe lead one to believe something paranormal may have led to the disappearance of both the USS Cyclops and Flight 19. Or perhaps there's a more simple explanation that Flight 19 may have simply ran out of gas, or the airplane that was sent to find them just blew up. So very simple explanations may actually be more true.
These wild theories would be bolstered in the coming decades by numerous articles and even more books. Up until now, theories were largely based on terrestrial, physical causes. But all that was to change by the testimony of a man who claimed to have entered a vortex where time and space were altered. The Bermuda Triangle. For centuries, it has been an enigmatic source of intrigue. A place where uncanny events seem to happen outside the normal bounds of physical reality. But is there any truth to these mysterious tales? Combing through countless articles and books on the subject is Tony McMahon.
As mysteries go, the Bermuda Triangle is actually pretty recent. It's very much a post-war conspiracy theory, and that coincides with the massive growth in transportation of people and of cargo. So it really is a conspiracy theory for our time.
In the post-war era, particularly after Flight 19, there is a renewed interest in the Bermuda Triangle in popular culture.
There's a flurry of newspaper articles about incidents within the Bermuda Triangle, and they really tap into growing Cold War paranoia in the United States, in particular in the 1950s, a realization that there were forces on planet Earth operating against the US and possibly forces in outer space.
In 1950, an article by Miami press writer E.V.W. Jones is published in several American newspapers that highlights more vanishing acts in the same region after 1945.
The fascinating thing about this 1950 article is that it first describes the Bermuda Triangle. It doesn't use that term, but it tells us that between Miami, Puerto Rico, and Bermuda, there is an area where things are disappearing.
The article adds more intrigue by pointing to the case of the Sandra, a missing cargo ship from June of 1950 that set sail in good weather from Savannah, Georgia, bound for Venezuela, charting a course directly through the Bermuda Triangle. Only days out to sea, it was lost.
And most fascinatingly, the payoff at the end of the article is worth noting, because it says that even though we have a modernizing society, and remember that this was the post-war boom, that even though our society is modern, there are ancient forces that we still do not fully understand operating below the surface.
These ancient forces and articles like Jones's served to stoke the fires of mystery and played into the growing fears of the unknown. The truth, and what Jones left out of his article, is that Sandra left port and sailed directly into a major storm, that other boats were lost in that same storm, and that insurers confidently reported the ship was sunk. All inconvenient truths for the growing Bermuda Triangle mystery. A mystery that was only just beginning to take hold.
Think about it. What's going to be more attractive to a news organization or a journalist? Plane crashes or plane crashes in the Bermuda Triangle? Bermuda Triangle gives you that extra spice. It opens up the story to all sorts of aspects. It's always going to be compelling copy.
2 years later, at the height of McCarthy's witch hunts, brought about by Cold War paranoia between the Soviets and the West, these same disappearances were the subject of a new spin on the mystery.
A journalist called George X. Sand writes an article for Fate magazine in 1952, which is headlined "Sea Mystery at Our Back Door," really playing on American paranoia. And now Sand is describing in much more granular detail what is going on in the Bermuda Triangle. And he's listing off one incident after another, including the notorious Flight 19, where multiple planes simply disappear. And he's also making the point that the rescue missions that go to find those who've disappeared also disappear.
The sensationalism continued in an article by Vincent Gaddis. It appeared in Argosy, one of the largest pulp fiction magazines ever published.
Vincent Gaddis was described in one review as a thorough writer. He was regarded as a mainstream journalist. He'd worked for the UPI news agency. He'd been a corporate copywriter and worked in public relations. So his CV certainly pointed to somebody that you could trust.
And in 1964, with John F. Kennedy only recently assassinated, the nuclear standoff in Cuba still fresh in everyone's minds, and spaceships now a reality, Gaddis committed to print the term that we all know and use today.
In 1964, Gaddis publishes an article on the Bermuda Triangle. It's on the front page, and there is the term for millions of people to see: Bermuda Triangle.
It wasn't the only article Gaddis wrote at this time, but it was his most memorable. He was a writer looking for a cause. He had an uncanny ability to play into the psychology of the age, and in the Bermuda Triangle, he'd identified a profitable muse.
Gaddis covered a lot of topics in the 1950s, and he really tapped into the anxieties of the time, including fear of nuclear war. And he wrote about people and communities that were thinking about leaving the cities to try and flee to safety.
The legend was further stoked by an international best-selling book in 1974 entitled The Bermuda Triangle by Charles Berlitz.
Charles Berlitz was part of the family that owned the famous publishing house. He worked for US Army intelligence and then became a kind of purveyor of paranormal theories.
One of his more outlandish theories took in an ancient mystery that predated almost all others: Atlantis.
Berlitz takes the Bermuda Triangle theory to a whole new level. What he has is the ancient city of Atlantis submerged at the bottom of the sea in this region. And what's happening is that these crystals that once powered Atlantis are now taking pot shots at passing ships and planes.
That wasn't the only theory that looked at otherworldly explanations.
Other supernatural theories include the idea that extraterrestrials are using the Bermuda Triangle as a kind of portal to enter planet Earth, or that there is an extraterrestrial base of some kind on the ocean bed, and that human beings are being abducted from passing planes and ships for experimentation.
The book sold nearly 20 million copies in 30 languages. It was so successful, Berlitz followed up with a sequel only 3 years later called Without a Trace. It featured a little-known story about a pilot named Bruce Gernon, who claimed to have flown through a portal over the Bermuda Triangle and survived.
Gernon claims that he was flying through the Bermuda Triangle when his small plane became enveloped in what he describes as an electronic fog. For several seconds, he had a sense of his own weightlessness, and he was frantically radioing to Miami to get a position. He thought he was 45 miles south of Bimini, but that wasn't the case.
About 3 minutes later, a radio controller identified an airplane headed towards Miami.
As the clouds parted, Gernon could see Miami Beach, which completely took him by surprise. And the plane landed at Palm Beach International Airport. Now that was at 35 minutes sooner than it should have been. And there were 10 gallons of fuel on the plane that shouldn't have been there.
Even accounting for the jet stream, which is proven to give planes flying east to west a boost in speed, this was still highly unusual. Although nobody doubted Gernon's qualifications as a pilot, his experience only added to the legend as the public latched on to a new dimension to this mystery. He claimed to have entered a portal where time and space were altered. Many began to speculate this is what happened to Flight 19. It was perfect fodder for the ever-growing interest in the paranormal. Gernon wrote his own book about what happened.
And he spent nearly 40 years researching this incident before he made it public and came out with his book, which has sold considerably. But mainstream science is not as yet convinced by the account of what he says happened.
The Bermuda Triangle myth was further popularized in film and TV, either by being the background for the plot or just by references to some of its most notorious cases.
Blockbuster movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, you may recall a visual reference to a ship called the SS Cotopaxi, which disappeared in 1925 with all crew on board. You'll see it in that movie in the Gobi Desert. You know, it's been mysteriously dropped thousands of miles away. The only problem with that is that in 2020, the ship was discovered at the bottom of the sea, just off the coast of Florida. So it hadn't been miraculously or mysteriously transported thousands of miles. It pretty much was where it sank. And it has to be said, it wasn't within the Bermuda Triangle after all.
So is the Bermuda Triangle recognized as a definite geographic location? And if so, is that location recognized as being unusually dangerous?
Lloyd's of London is the world's leading insurer of maritime risk, and it doesn't charge higher premiums for vessels, for planes going through the Bermuda Triangle. Neither does it insist that vessels do not go through the Bermuda Triangle. There are no restrictions on that journey. So if Lloyd's of London doesn't feel that there's a risk there, then there more than likely isn't one.
Although logical explanations are available from many of the recorded disappearances, most still prefer to cling to the mysteries that lurk in the depths of Bermuda's warm waters.
It doesn't matter how much crash investigation techniques or science disproves the Bermuda Triangle, because in the end of the day, it has huge appeal as a story. It plays to our phobias, but for journalists, it's always going to be great copy. If anything crashes or disappears in that part of the world, it's a Bermuda Triangle story.
For journalist and historian Tony, the Bermuda Triangle isn't a product of our fears, but of our imagination and desire to give meaning to the events that happen around us.
As human beings, we are hardwired to love a good yarn. We love mystery. Remember, our ancestors gathered around the fire telling each other stories. We like a good story. You know, the facts are boring. And that's why we believe in the Bermuda Triangle.
And one such mystery expanded beyond the Bermuda Triangle, one that connected it to various other anomalies around the world. The Bermuda Triangle has been the site of numerous high-profile and ever-mysterious naval and aviation vanishings. Are these disappearances due to out-of-the-ordinary causes, or simply a logical concurrence of environment and statistics? This bewildering span of ocean is still a hot media topic with an eagerly receptive audience. But how has the legend managed to sustain itself?
For me, the Bermuda Triangle is that story that still scares the child inside us. We can't explain it. Things disappear.
Connecting the dots of the triangle is historian Dr. Fern Riddell.
Although there are lots of crazy theories about the Bermuda Triangle, there have also been people who've tried to explain it through the natural world.
Bizarre aberrations and mysterious vanishings aren't specific to the Bermuda Triangle alone. Similar accounts have been reported in the Devil's Sea off the coast of Japan.
Although in the West we're obsessed with the Bermuda Triangle, in Asia they have the Devil's Sea, and it's a site where planes go missing, boats go missing, of mysterious unknown activity.
From the invading fleet of the Kublai Khan to Japanese World War II naval boats, through to more modern research vessels, the Devil's Sea has a similarly worrying reputation.
This is the same all over the world, but there's no evidence that disappearances or accidents happen more frequently in the Bermuda Triangle to any other well-traveled, well-navigated place in the world. From the ancient Greek sirens to the biblical Leviathan and the Dragon Kings of China, every culture has tried to explain the dangers that can happen to you at sea. The Bermuda Triangle is just the next on the list.
The connection between these seemingly unrelated locations can be traced to a theory by Scottish biologist Ivan T. Sanderson.
One of the ways people have tried to explain the Bermuda Triangle through science comes from Ivan Sanderson's theory of vile vortices, or the Devil's Graveyard. These are 12 places across the globe where electromagnetic disturbances can be noticed.
Sanderson theorized that hot and cold air along with sea currents might create the electromagnetic anomalies responsible for the disappearances and instrument malfunctions in these areas.
The difference between magnetic north and true north is that true north is a fixed point on the globe, whereas magnetic north relies on the Earth's magnetic fields, so if there's any disruption, it can move.
Sanderson noticed that the Bermuda Triangle fell within the range of the agonic line where true and magnetic north perfectly aligned. It was claimed that this was the reason for the mysterious disappearances of boats and planes. Sanderson claimed there were 12 vortices, 5 along the Tropic of Capricorn, 5 along the Tropic of Cancer, and 1 at the North and South Poles. The vortices not only had a pattern across the globe, they were evenly spread out.
Throughout history, the vile vortices have been places of disappearances from ships to aeroplanes.
He further claimed that standard physics did not apply in these areas, and that the intersecting points made for an Earth that was not spherical in origin.
In 1973, an article was published in Chemistry and Life by 3 Russian scientists, and it asked the question, is the Earth a large crystal?
The scientists postulated that Earth's formation began as a large crystal with the angular dimensions of a pentadodecahedron. Eventually, the planet wore down into a spherical ball. Their report goes on to say that the Earth projects from within itself a matrix of cosmic energy made up of 12 pentagonal plates, Sanderson's vile vortices.
Much like the tectonic plates, these plates sit over the Earth made of cosmic energy, and there are 62 junctions. The Bermuda Triangle sits at the heart of one of those. Their article claims that each of these junctions gives us sites of prehistoric fauna, incredible civilizations, or mysterious sites of paranormal activity.
Easter Island, Mohenjo-Daro, the Devil's Sea, the Kailua volcano, and the Bermuda Triangle are all situated within these locations, which for Sanderson was proof for his theory. Not everyone was as convinced. The idea of a crystal grid has been difficult for the mainstream scientific community to accept. Researchers have instead continued to search for other natural causes, one of which also hangs in scientific limbo. Fern has been looking into it.
In 2016, researchers at the Arctic University in Norway theorized that the huge craters they could find on the seabed were the product of explosions of methane gas. These craters and the explosions that made them were absolutely gigantic, and it was theorized that if they were found in the Bermuda Triangle, they could be responsible for the disappearances. So while the methane explosions might explain what happens to ships, how would it affect a plane? Well, it was theorized that these massive gas bubbles, once they came to the surface and into the atmosphere, might cause extreme turbulence and cause planes to crash.
This was a wild theory indeed, but even until recently, major scientific institutions were still thinking about the Bermuda Triangle as a problem for science to solve. After being thoroughly researched, the methane theory was also found to have serious and fundamental flaws.
What evidence is there for the methane gas bubbles explosion theory? Absolutely none. They looked at the seabed in the Bermuda Triangle. It doesn't have the same massive craters.
While the Earth indisputably contains powerful geology beyond our current understanding, the true explanation for the Bermuda Triangle may ultimately reside not in the ocean, the weather, vortices, or in methane gas bubbles, but in our minds.
Another theory about how we make sense of these disappearances is actually to do with the human mind and how we make sense of the world around us.
Humans have always required a framework for our imagination, and our mind can frequently play tricks on us, called the frequency illusion.
The frequency illusion is the theory that we as humans, that once we see something or hear about it, we then start to recognize it everywhere.
It's a form of cognitive bias. When we hear something frequently, we begin to assign events to that thing less discriminately, making it appear more often and seem more likely. Combine this with something like sea and air travel, and you have a powerful combination.
The sea is an incredibly dangerous place, but as humans, we're often on it. Everything that we do connects to the waves. And when something terrible happens there, we really try to find a way to explain it. The Bermuda Triangle is just a psychological way for us to explain terrible accidents at sea and kind of absolve us of responsibility. We've done it with myths and legends, and now we're doing it with the Bermuda Triangle.
So is the case closed on the infamous Bermuda Triangle?
Our cultural imagination has always needed sites like the Bermuda Triangle to be the repository for our fears and also take responsibility for the things we cannot blame. If we didn't have the Bermuda Triangle, we would have invented something else.
The team have looked in the skies, the seas, the seabed, and perhaps more importantly, they've looked into our collective and individual mindset for an answer to this very modern mystery.
I am skeptical of the Bermuda Triangle. I think it's a place that's not really necessarily different from other places.
Faced with an event that's ascribed to the action of the Bermuda Triangle, I'm going to ask, is it human error? Is it weather? And only if it's neither of those am I going to resort to the question of, well, what else could it be? I mean, what's more exciting sounding? A portal to another dimension or a plane that crashed because it ran out of gas over the ocean?
The US Coast Guard also doesn't tell people that they can't enter the Bermuda Triangle. It doesn't say, don't go there, you might die. So if the Coast Guard doesn't feel there's a problem, well, I think it's a good chance there isn't one.
I do think humans are hardwired to appreciate tales of magic and mystery and a sense of wonder about the world around us. So I think that the Bermuda Triangle feeds that elemental human hunger.